Welcome to the Bovine Banter with the Penn State Extension Dairy Team. My name is Adrian Barragan, and I am Extension Veterinarian and Assistant Clinical Professor within the Department of Veterinary and Biomedical Sciences at Penn State University. I would like to welcome Dr. Kathy Sezsmith, who is a faculty within the Department of Agricultural Economics, Sociology, and Education at Penn State. She's joining us today to discuss about some of her latest research on personal health and safety management in dairy farms. Thank you for joining us today, Kathy. Today, we also have with us Tony Brubaker from Brubaker Farms and Candice White from Daughter Dairy, who will be providing us with their insights regarding implementing proper personal safety practices in the day-to-day farm management. Welcome and thanks for joining us, Tony and Candice. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what is your role at your work. Kathy, you can go first.
Sure. Thank you very much, Adrian. So I am an assistant professor of rural sociology in the department that you mentioned here at Penn State and University Park. So I have a split appointment. I do both teaching and research that focuses on different aspects of community development. And I've always focused in my studies and in my research now on Latin American immigrants in the United States, as well as in other work, sort of the reasons why they leave their home communities. But primarily I've focused on the experiences of Mexican and Guatemalan workers in dairy farms in the Northeast, so in the state of New York and now in Pennsylvania. And so I've looked at different aspects of their lives on dairy farms, including social networks, how they sort of get around and manage their daily lives under, certain limitations, and then also health and safety and occupational hazards and the different factors that contribute to that on dairy farms. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Kathy. Tony, you want to go next?
Sure. Thanks, Adrian. Yeah, Tony Brubaker Farms. And so my primary role on the dairy here, I'm in partnership with my brother and nephew, and my role is working with what we'd say the inside help, the personnel working primarily with the animals and the milking, feeding, breeding, and young stock.
Thank you, Tony. Candice, you want to go next?
Sure. Thanks, Adrian. My name is Candice White. I am the dairy manager at Daughter Dairy, which is located in Mill Hall, Pennsylvania. We're currently milking 1,250 cows and 3,000 acres. And my main role is, like I said, the dairy manager, so I'm in charge of everything that happens with the dairy side. So if it's milk, so I'm in charge of it. And all the young stock also.
Thank you, Candice, and thank you all for being here with us today and sharing your expertise and your knowledge. So we're going to start with Kathy. So Kathy, I know you have some exciting research on this field. I will start asking if you could share or tell us a little bit about what are some of the main objectives of your latest research studies. I know that you have done some previous work in Cornell, but also you have done some work here at Pennsylvania as well. If you would like to share that with us.
Sure. So the latest research studies on dairy farms, I guess there's two that I'll raise. So the most recent one is the one that you are leading, thankfully for all of us. And it's a study that I'll let you speak to it if you want in a minute, but that primarily was aimed at trying to understand how both immigrant and local workers perceive the human resources practices on their farms and what suggestions they might have, or if they think, certain aspects of the human resources strategies could be changed or improved at all. And as part of that, we were asking workers about health and safety concerns. Do they hold them? What particular aspects of their jobs might make them concerned? How safe do they feel at work? And we asked about COVID-19 vaccination as part of that study as well, because, as everyone knows, it's spread through close contact. And in a milking parlor, you have pretty close indoor contact. So those are the objectives of that study. And the other one, the previous one, the study that I did in New York State over several years before coming here, was a broader ethnographic study. So I spent quite a lot of time doing outreach work with migrant workers and their families on dairy farms. And as part of that, I interviewed them and tried to get a better understanding of, what is it like to live very close to a border? Because most of the state of New York is within the border jurisdiction, and different aspects of their employment experience and conditions. And a big theme that emerged in talking to people about their jobs was health and safety and training to be safe on the job. So those are the two kind of big dairy farm studies I've been involved in. Did you want to add anything about the Pennsylvania study, or do you think I captured it okay?
No, I think that you summarized it amazingly, Kathy, and thanks for sharing that. Really interesting. So now, with that being said, what were the main findings that you have found in these studies regarding what you were saying, the safety, safety practices or personal safety practices in farm? So what highlights would you like to share about those two studies?
Sure. So in the Pennsylvania study, I think what is really innovative and also interesting about what we did was to interview and try to compare the experiences of the Spanish-speaking immigrant workers from Latin America and the local workforce, because there is a tendency in the academic research on dairy farms to really focus on the immigrant workers, right? Like there's this big wave of immigration to dairies in the region. And so people have really focused on their conditions and concerns, which is obviously very important, but perhaps at the expense of taking a close look at how the local workers are experiencing their workplace as well. So through that, we were able to do some comparisons. And one of the things that we found was a greater share of English-speaking workers had suffered an accident on the farm than the Spanish-speaking workers. And so we haven't sort of fully analyzed the data in order to directly sort of compare the types of accidents and injuries they're facing. That'll be the next step in the analysis. But it was important to sort of highlight that not just Spanish-speaking workers, but other workers also can experience accident and injury, of course. And we also found that both populations, the English-speaking and Spanish-speaking workers, had very low COVID vaccination rates. So, in the range of 20 to 30% in both groups. But they had different reasons for this. So the local workers felt that the vaccine maybe could not be trusted or was not needed. And this research was done about a year ago. So the vaccine wasn't brand new, but it wasn't quite as ubiquitous as it is now, you could say. Whereas the Spanish-speaking workers were more likely to say that they didn't have access to the information or the resources they needed to go out and get vaccinated. So they both had low vaccination rates, but for somewhat different reasons. So those were some of the findings from that study, but we're continuing to analyze the data. It takes a bit longer to analyze the sections where people explain in words why they did this or that. And when you have 200 answers, you have to go through that pretty carefully. The other study, that was, again, the one that was in the state of New York, and that one focused on, exclusively on the Spanish-speaking population. And so that was a qualitative study. So it's not a big numbers study. It was more like a smaller numbers, but ask people really in-depth questions. So of 48 immigrant workers who were asked if they had ever had an accident or an injury on a dairy farm, about 70% said yes. And about 80% of those said that they needed to get medical attention for the kind of accident that they had or injury they had experienced. So most of those, and I'm sure Tony and Candice can speak to this and explain in much better, detail than I could, obviously. Most of those were related to cows, right? To being kicked or pushed by cows, etc. But what I thought was kind of interesting. So not just the stuff that, everybody probably knows about what's risky on a dairy farm. In addition to these accidents and injuries, some of the workers talked about chronic conditions or forms of discomfort that are related to their work. So, for example, the workers working long overnight shifts were drinking a lot of like Red Bull and energy drinks and things to stay awake. And they associated that with gastritis, like a stomach condition that was they were talking to doctors about that. And they also had concerns about headache and fatigue related to either split shifts or long overnight shifts. So some of these issues were coming up that weren't, they're not necessarily going to be captured in statistics about accident and injury on a farm, but they're fairly commonly experienced as just part of the job itself. So those were some of the interesting things that came out of talking to all these people about their jobs.
That's very interesting, Kathy. And it's intriguing the difference between states on the percentage of injuries or employees that reported injuries, because you mentioned about around 70% in New York, which appeared to be much larger than the incidence that at least was reported in our study in the Hispanic population in the Pennsylvania. So that's really interesting to see. And also the chronic conditions that you mentioned, Kathy, that is also something that's quite often we don't really pay much attention. But when you think about quality life and long-term employees, right, when you're thinking about retaining those knowledge or long-term employees, those are things that you really have to look forward to improve those conditions.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great. So Kathy, I think you mentioned a little bit about the COVID vaccination practices. And, we talk about that sort of pandemic now might seem distant, that is already passed and is all news. But I think that from this experience, we can learn for the future, right? In case of something like this will happen again. So, what would be your main take-home messages on that, based on the findings of the study? Like, what would be, and you mentioned a little bit about this, of what were the main concerns or the main reasons that they didn't actually got vaccinated? So, what would be your advice, I guess, on how could we improve that for in a future scenario when these might arise again?
Yeah, I think despite the differences in the reasons why workers weren't getting vaccinated at high rates on these farms, I think in both cases, in terms of the trust issue and the resources issue, it all points to a need for information and education about both the potential, very serious and long-term effects of COVID, as well as the safety of the vaccine and how effective it seems to be in preventing, these long-term impacts. So I would say that, the practical recommendation that comes out of it is for, the stakeholders who have the capacity to mobilize and try to bring information as well as the vaccine itself to dairy farms, if at all possible.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't agree even more with that, Kathy. So out of these two studies, if you had to come out with some applied practical recommendations to producers to manage their employees better in this area, what would be your main 2 or 3 recommendations that you will provide to them?
Yeah. So one thing that comes to mind is related to training. So in both studies, workers, and including both the English-speaking and Spanish-speaking workers in the Pennsylvania case, they all mentioned feeling that they hadn't received a lot of training. It was a common perception that more training would have been appreciated. In the case of the workers, a majority of workers in both studies reported being trained by a coworker on the job, which makes sense, right? I mean, if you are hiring someone who speaks exclusively Spanish, you better be sure that they understand the training, right? So it makes sense to have someone else who speaks Spanish doing the training. But it does, I'm not sure exactly what the logistics of that would be, and I'm sure Tony and Candice have a lot of experience and comments on this topic. But if there were a way to somehow maybe standardize training protocols to make sure that all workers are getting the information they need and reduce sort of, relying on one person who, for some whatever reason, might not be delivering, their best training that day or whatever. If there were a way to address that, that would probably be helpful. Maybe visual training materials would be helpful too, because sometimes, especially on some farms, workers from indigenous speaking communities in Mexico and Guatemala are coming at higher rates to work on dairy farms. They might not even communicate best in Spanish, right? So really visual materials are probably the most helpful for some groups. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's a great advice, Kathy. And I mean, that is sort of the area that I have been working the last 10 or 12 years since I moved to the States on personal training. And you hit right the main topic there about the need of proper training, but really good comment on the different language. Even Spanish sometimes is not even enough, because there are people that they have a pretty basic understanding in Spanish, and the main language is those dialects that you mentioned. I mean, I think I would like to open here the space for Tony and Candice to comment on this before we even get into more details of the practice. But Tony or Candice, do you have any comments on this sort of training component that Kathy is mentioning? How you I know we always talk about standardizing the training program to get that consistency, that unbiased, and decrease on the drift shop that some employees might have. But how have you worked in this area? And what the scenario where you have lack of time, maybe don't speak the same language, or it's really hard to get education in that language. So how have you troubleshoot this issue? Tony, you want to go first, or Candice?
Candice, do you want to take a crack at it, or do you want me to?
Sure. I don't know that we've answered any of the problems or solved any of the issues, because we are still doing those same practices. A new guy comes on board, he follows around the milking person for a couple of days, and then he follows around the cow pusher for a couple of days. And I just had this conversation today with one employee. Like, I would love to bring somebody into our farm and do specialized videos about our farm specifically. Like, we have a cross vent barn, and all of the doors need to stay shut in order for the airflow to go. Well, every time I walk by this one barn, the door's always cracked open a foot. And it's one of those things that just drives me nuts. And it's like, do they not understand what the purpose of these doors being shut is? And, when they do come on board training, there's so much to learn, and what groups are where, and what cows go where, and how to milk, and then, throw all these other things on top of them. So I would like to do better and do maybe some more videos specific to our farm to help us with, just these little things that are very important, but they're little and sometimes overlooked when the training is going on.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we haven't solved all the issues with these things as well, but some of the things that we've found over the years that have worked. I mean, first off, when training people, I really try to work with my guys to have good open communication and give me good notice if somebody's, say, going to leave to go back to Mexico, because I really like to have new people, training for 3 weeks to a month is ideal, because I think it takes that long for the things like Candice is talking about, like the doors that are left open a foot, all these little things that they kind of need to learn. Of course, trying to always put what I would find to be my top people as the trainers, but then for the things that like a lot of the safety things and a lot of the other things those things we address in our monthly communication meetings. I find like that's the best place for us, where we have everybody around the table at once and usually try to have a safety talk of some sort, or, even talking about things like, when you're dealing with a fresh cow, don't turn your back to her. Make sure that you recognize the temperament of the cow when you're going in the pen. We have gates that we can swing and chain off so that they can deal with the calf and have the cow separate, for safety. But these are things that new employees won't always know, and so we do try to communicate those things. And also expectations, I think, is a big thing. Sometimes, what employees think you expect may be different. For instance, if there's a cow that's a continual kicker, that wants to kick every time, they're thinking, I want every drop of milk out of every cow, every milking. I tell those guys, I say, hey, listen, if a cow's kicking like that, let's sell her, because, I don't want anybody to be in danger while they're milking, and it's too valuable to have healthy people as opposed to keeping one cow that's going to come in and kick all the time. So just even communicating things like that as far as expectations, I think has been a real important thing for us.
Yeah, those are great comments. And I love the comment that Candice did about the customized videos, because, sometimes we try to develop, especially from my role in extension, we develop these blanket videos of training that, do not apply to every single operation, right? But, along with that come the challenge of the timing and how time consuming is developing this material, right? But Tony, the comment on the training on the people that is coming, the new personnel, and having that open communication about when people is leaving, when new people is coming, I think that's critical to ensure that they're ready to roll when it's time for them. And with regards to the safety training, Tony, I think that's a great strategy to do it on the monthly or bi-monthly communication meetings. One comment that I'm just going to do on the study that Kathy was talking, that we are working together from PA or in PA, is that safety trainings was a really low percentage of employees reported that they received any sort of safety training. So really, and perhaps it comes from not knowing that they're actually getting the actual training, maybe on the day-to-day basis, but a formal training per se, right? When there was a low percentage of employees, either Spanish speaking or English speaking or native workers, that they actually reported that. So really great comments. All right.
Can I make a quick comment about the videos? While the Candice suggested, you talked about having people come in. I think there's even opportunity if you have somebody that is fluent in Spanish and English and can understand, both languages. Like a couple of years ago, we did a video for safety around harvest. And actually my brother did it. He just recorded it on his phone. Telling people, like, we want people to be following the speed limit. We want people to not be getting out of a vehicle without a safety vest on, to not ever go out in front of a chopper, to get a piece of metal out of the header if somebody's in seat, things like this. Of course, everybody kind of made fun of the video because it's kind of corny, but it was an easy way to get the message across to the whole team very efficiently and uniformly. So I think even the videos don't have to be that crazy. Like we don't need to hire a videography company necessarily to do these videos. They might be a little cheesy or corny, but I think they get the point done.
Oh, that's a great comment, Tony. And even when you think about the language barrier with those videos and that visual component, you're recording somebody doing what they should be doing, or when they do what they're doing, just some sort of sign language saying no, you don't have to do that, or just that would be a great strategy to address the language barrier, right? It's just put a really visual, as Kathy mentioned, but also adding the video component with the sign language on basic safety practice like the ones that you mentioned, Tony. So that's great comments. All right, let's switch gears a little bit and let's move to Tony and Candice. And I really, I work with many producers around PA, Ohio, and New York, and Maryland. But I can honestly say that, Tony and Candice, you have one of the best personal management programs I have ever seen. So that's what I invite you to this podcast. And I really think that your expertise, your experience can really help the producers, the community to improve or get the next step on their management on these lines. So with that being said, would you mind commenting on the actual program that you have in place for employee safety? What are the actual practices that you are doing in your farm, or you have in place in your farm to manage this component or important component of personal management? Let's see, Tony, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot to add other than what I said before, but I think for us, the big thing is the communication meetings. Always trying to include safety talks and really trying to communicate with our staff that our expectations and our values are for them to be safe at their workplace. We do not want them taking risks. That's not what we're asking them to do. We want them to understand how to do their job and do it safely. Then some other things like for us that we do as, I guess, some upper level management, more or less, we make sure like anything that's going to be on the road, any equipment, whether it be UTVs or little tractors or skid loaders, that everything's equipped with safety signs and strobe lights and DOT tape, and make sure all the stuff's working, making sure that all augers and PTOs have guards on, and that they know, don't get near those things. So I think a lot of things is us making sure that we have our equipment properly maintained and set up for safety, but then also communicating what our expectations are to the employees on a regular basis.
No, that's a great comment, Tony. And it's just communication. What I just always go back to the study that Kathy was mentioning that we did last year in PA. Communication was one of the most important things that employees, regardless of their language, mentioned as one of the main priority when it comes to improving their management. So I think that I can't emphasize enough how important is that component. So Candy, would you like to share next?
Sure. I have to say I am very blessed by having Manuel, who is our milker supervisor. He is just phenomenal. He's Spanish speaking. He's been with us for 15, 16 years now. He's kind of been always our go-to guy to bring in new help. And then because he brought them in, they felt comfortable with him. So Manuel really just evolved into this role kind of naturally of being the manager. And he has very good open communication skills with them. If he sees that they're doing something wrong, he'll go and tell them like right away on the spot, like, hey, I see you're doing this. This isn't the best way. Let's look at doing something a little bit different. And then we do have probably quarterly meetings where we bring in an outside advisor, and him and Manuel kind of run the meeting together, and we talk about our goals, our expectations. And they call it kind of a therapy session also, all the milkers, because it is a time where they can all be together and they can all just talk about things, whether it be little things, big things, or, hey, the rubber's coming up, we need to fix that. So I think just having open communication, and we don't have meetings as much as I'd like to, but sometimes you can't just have meetings all the time because work has to be done. But just having that open conversation, there's open communication lines, letting them tell us, hey, we need this or that to make our job better, easier, and we always try to get what they need. And as far as safety stuff, we do talk about opening gates versus climbing over gates. Take that couple extra seconds and open that chain if there's not a man past there versus climbing over it. And, looking out for fresh cows and always keeping your head on swivel, making sure the cows that are around you aren't giving a different demeanor or acting strangely. And some of the safety things that we've done, for example, like safety glasses. I went out and bought 50 pairs of safety glasses, made a nice little rack, put everyone's name on it. We talked to everybody what they're about. Some people wore them, some people didn't. I didn't say it was mandatory. I just kind of want to throw it out there to see how it went. The guys who did wear them probably wore them for about 3 or 4 weeks, and then they kind of went to the wayside. But at least we tried with that. So, and we do talk about cow handling for, the farm program, and we're always trying to bring the farm program, what's new with them. And we try to tell people, if you're sick, if you're not feeling well, take a day or 2 off. We'd rather you be at home and be miserable, or even if you think you're going to be, a little sickness, just stay home. We'll find somebody to cover your shift, take care of yourself, and then whenever you're feeling better, come back. Because the other thing is, if you're sick and you're in the milking parlor and you're working next to, next guy and he's sick, then he takes it home and then his wife gets sick and then it just goes down the line. So we've really tried to, since COVID, say, if you're not feeling well, stay home. We'll find somebody to cover your shift versus coming in and giving it to everybody else.
Great comment, Candice. And I think that I can find a common concepts across Tony and Candice. And I think that one of them was safety come first, and there's no rush, right? Be safe first. Do not rush, right? Do not climb over, the gates. And I think that, even there might be some even cultural component. I'm a Latino person as well. And the concept that at least I grew up with is that the fastest you do the job, the more efficient, the better, right? And when you understand the dynamics of the dairy industry or the dairy day-to-day management, it's not quite the case always, right? Even with milking, when I train employees and I tell them about the milk down and the lag time that has to be between you stimulate the cow until you attach the unit, it's not the fastest the better. You just get allowed the right time. So I love what I'm hearing about, the safety comes first and there's no rush. And if you don't feel better, you stay home, right? So all those really important components and the communication. I think that was like echoing around, I think the 4 of us, communication. And I agree with Candice that, it's challenging, right? Because we are so busy, so dynamic, so busy schedule. And sometimes we don't have the right amount of communication because of the dynamics, but we have to be conscious to make that time, right? At least as often as we can. And I love how Candice called these the therapy sessions. And even as part of this trial, the study that Kathy was mentioning, we actually did a lot of this communication. We helped to put together this monthly communication in the farms that were involved. And a lot of those employees, they actually saw as a therapy because it was their space to talk about issues they have, concerns, comments, and we have to allow that space for them to communicate that, to improve the work environment, to make them feel heard, and also to keep them, right? Because we spend so many resources, time training this employee. We rely on them for getting a proper job done. So, nobody likes when people leave the farm, right? So I think this component of communication and proper manage, along with the safety practice that you guys mentioned, is critical for retaining these knowledgeable employees. All right, I think that we are wrapping up the podcast. I just would like to invite all of our speakers to give us some final tips or comments that you would like to share with our audience, with our listeners. So we're going to start with Kathy. If you have any last comments that you would like to share.
Maybe the thing that comes to mind is just sort of going back to my point about, and again, I'm not saying that farmers are doing this, but not overlooking one population or the other, right? English speaking or Spanish speaking, but something that was just so striking in the research that we're doing here in Pennsylvania is that the local workers were voicing concerns as well as the Spanish speaking workers. And so maybe just, keeping an eye to what both groups are saying and what they need, what do they feel are their risks in their particular positions, and how can all those risks be best addressed.
Yeah, that's a great comment, Kathy, and I agree. So one of the most shocking results from this study was that the main area of improvement that that both Spanish-speaking and English-speaking workers reported was communication. And you will think, communication will be Spanish-speaking employees because they cannot communicate in English, but no, even English-speaking workers point that as the main area of improvement. So great comment, Kathy. Tony, any last comment on final tips?
No, I mean, I don't really have anything to add other than I would echo that. I mean, I think what my experience, our experience on the farm has been that, it is communication. You just can't have too much of it. But it has to be both formal and informal. You have to have those formal times to make sure that you're kind of dotting all the I's and crossing the T's. But then in between those formal times, for sure, it has to be daily communicating with everybody and promoting communication as a culture among employees too, not just managers or owners to employees, but also employee to employee. So again, communication.
No, that's a great comment, Tony. And even when you hear about sort of the fear to communicate, right? So just removing that fear that if you speak up, there's going to be negative consequences. So by embracing that culture of communication, or improving communication, you remove that fear of speaking up, and then it's when everything gets better, when the things get addressed on time, when the things are communicated in time. Great comment. Candice, any final comment?
Yeah, I would say that as dairy farmers, I feel like sometimes we need to do better at looking at our business as a business and not just what we grew up doing. I have friends who work in corporate America, and they have SOPs for everything and standard operating procedures, and they have everything together. There's an accident that happens, they know exactly the steps to take to minimize that accident or to fix that. Whereas dairy farmers, I feel like we're just like, well, yeah, we should probably fix that or figure out a better way of doing that. And I feel like we need to maybe become more better business-like when it comes to human resources. We are a family farm, and we're all family, and we always are. Just so it's a family farm. I grew up doing this. It's common nature. I know this, but not everybody has grown up like I have, and so I take things for granted that I probably shouldn't. Like, you don't know how to run a skid steer? What do you mean you don't know how to run a skid steer? So I think, stepping back and trying to look at our farm more of a business structure might be helpful.
I couldn't agree more, Candice, with that component. It's just, she's developing that structure, those standard operating procedures, and what you do when things go sideways, so things don't go as expected. Always having a plan A, B, and C. And yes, you say it's sort of the cultural or how farming was done always, or how you learn to farm or to manage animals or manage the operation. But taking that step back and analyzing that and putting those pieces in place, right? I agree with that, but I blame the time, right? Because when you think that takes a lot of time and expertise, and we are so busy in the field, it's like this, but it's just a matter of being conscious and understanding the importance of that and finding that time. But it's definitely challenging, right?
Yeah, I think for the last 10 years, I've been wanting to have an SOP for every single job in a farm, and I still don't even have a third of them done.
Right.
That's
Exactly.
been 10 years.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you so much, Kathy, Tony, and Candice, for taking the time to talk to us today. This was a great information. Thanks for sharing your knowledge, your expertise. This was incredible. And thank to all our listeners. Don't forget to tune in for our next episode where Penn State Extension educator Carly Baker will be interviewing Ken Griswold about silo gas safety.